Okay, we're started. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight at our inaugural green home tour here at Sustainable Claremont. If you joined us last week, then welcome back. We're so happy to have you. And if you're joining us for the first time this week, we've got a great tour for you. So thank you all for coming. This green home tour is a program that we began planning more than 2 years ago. It's obviously taken many turns because of COVID and because we couldn't have it in person. But despite all of that, we're so happy to be here with you all tonight. And we got a really great tour planned for you. This program is really meant to be an important sustainability resource for the community, for you. As you know, over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to be zeroing in on some specific elements of sustainability. We're looking at 3 different homes and also at renter houses and a senior community. This is the second of a 4-part series. All of the homeowners and renters that we're going to be talking to, they've spent countless hours researching, exploring, looking into different types of home energy upgrades and home sustainability upgrades. And so the aim of this program is really for them to communicate to you all of those lessons that they learned along the way. So, what they would have done differently, what products or people or contractors were the best, what they wish they had known in hindsight, and any questions that you may have. Tonight's been made possible by some amazing sponsors, including Southern California Edison, Energy Upgrade California, Lewis Management Group, Carol Holder, and John Malincrot. And it's because of their financial support that we're able to offer this green home tour for free. So we're super thankful for them, and we're super thankful to be able to offer this resource to everybody who wants to join. Cost not an issue. For this evening, we've got something really special planned. So we're going to be talking about gray water systems and backyard chickens and a couple other topics, time permitted. Just like last week, we'll start with a brief video tour. Today, we're looking at Chris Chen and Sorrel Steelstra's home in Claremont. We'll follow that with a conversation led by my colleague, Angela Oakley, and Sorrel Steelstra, one of our homeowners, and also a Sustainable Claremont board member. We're also joined by Lee Gerard, founder and principal of Greywater Core. He's an expert in designing and installing graywater irrigation systems. And we have Laura Roche, who is a former Sustainable Claremont board member and a Claremont resident who raises backyard chickens. So they're not going to be presenting, but they're going to be with us tonight just in case there are any questions or any further expertise. They'll jump in and help answer questions and drive the discussion throughout the night. The aim of the Green Home Tour really is to provide you, the viewer tonight, the attendee tonight, with the opportunity to ask questions to help you take that first step towards living more sustainable. So please feel free to ask questions at any time during the night, particularly during the Q&A session. We really do want to hear from you. So the questions that you ask will really shape the trajectory of the conversations that we have tonight. To do that, just press the little raise hand button on your Zoom and we'll unmute you when time permits. If we don't get to all of the questions, we'll gather them at the end of the night. We'll work with Sorrel to get those questions answered, and we'll send them to you. If you don't feel comfortable asking the question, being unmuted and asking in real time, just drop the question into the chat box, and I'll be collating all those questions and relaying them to Angela and Sorrel. Thank you all again so much for joining tonight, and I'm going to go ahead and get us started by showing our video tour. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. Angela, can you give me a thumbs up just to make sure the music works?
Hi, I'm Sorrel and this is Chris, and we want to welcome everybody to our house. We bought this house in 2008, and we've been trying to work on different projects ever since then. All of this used to be grass before we moved in, and so we're also working little by little to plant native and drought-tolerant plants all around the house.
The house was built in 1925, and we've tried to update it along the lines that we could. So we have solar panels on the roof. We have a hydronic heating system, which uses the hot water from the water heater to heat the house. But what we're going to show you today are the chickens and the Greywater system. I'll talk about the Greywater system.
I'll tell you about our chickens.
So I'm going to tell you about our Greywater system. It's a permitless system that uses the clothes washing machine and sends water out through its own pump into a drip system. So our system actually has the washing machine in the middle of the house. So it was a little bit more difficult to plumb, and the pipe runs through the crawl space and then out a hole in the foundation over here into the drip system. So the system runs into a PVC pipe with clean out into a regular drip system, which terminates in about 10 mulch basins. So here's an example of one of the mulch basins, one of the 10 of them. This is actually at the end of the line, so there's a overflow right over here, which is at the very end of the line in case the water gets too strong, but it never really does because it's not quite that much pressure. The mulch basin itself, again, has one of these plastic vaults in it, and then there's mulch surrounding the area fairly deep, and then there's this spigot at the very end, and the water comes out of there. The idea is that the water fills these mulch basins and spreads out and can feed the roots of fruit trees or any other trees that you like. Once a year, you have to flush it out with your hose, which isn't that hard. We have a shutoff valve that keeps the water from backwashing into the house, and then you attach the hose to the system, turn it on, check each mulch basin to make sure that there's no blockages, and then that's pretty much it. And it's usually just some lint that needs to be pulled out.
So here is the chicken coop that we have right now. We have had different coops in different locations over the years. We started raising chickens right when we first moved into this house, so around 2008. At that time during the day, we would let the chickens free range all around the yard. And that worked really well for a long time, although they are very messy. They dig up all the plants and make walkways messy and all of that, but it was worth it. Until the last couple of years when we found that we were having more and more of a problem with predators. So that's why we built this coop, which is bigger than the ones we've had before, and now they're enclosed all of the time. Even though we're here in the village, we have bobcats that visit, and coyotes, we have hawks, and I think we've even seen a fox or two. And in Claremont, you can have 3 chickens. And if you live south of Baseline, I believe, you can't have any roosters. We get about an egg a day from each chicken, typically. As they get older, they lay less frequently, but they lay for many, many years. That's one of the main reasons that we chose to raise chickens, is that we love the eggs. We also love the fact that the chickens will eat a lot of our food waste. So it really reduces the amount of food that we either throw out or even have to compost, because they love to take scraps and turn it into eggs. So that's a really fun thing about having them. One of the problems that we had with our chickens when they were able to free range is that not only could they go everywhere in the yard, but all the animals in the yard could also go into their coop. So it was a problem with attracting squirrels and other rodents and things to eating their food. So now that they're fully enclosed, we don't have a problem with squirrels getting in, but even this enclosure makes it's still even here hard to keep out small rats and things. So we got this Treadle Feeder, which is great because it is completely closed except for when a chicken steps on this, and this bar opens up the area where the food is. So that's how they eat now. So that really reduces the waste when we used to leave food on the ground, and also reduces the amount of rats that we're attracting by raising the chickens. So really love this Treadle Feeder. You refill the food up here, pour it in, it goes down, and like I said, the chickens just stand on there and eat. Yeah, these chickens are about 1 year old, so they're in their prime egg laying time. These ones are more skittish than a lot of the chickens we've had in the past. So they don't really like to be handled, and they don't even come to us when we bring food scraps, whereas other chickens we've had have been a lot friendlier. And I think it has a lot to do with the breed. Different breeds are known to actually have different personalities, but I think it's also that I don't spend as much time as I could sort of handling them and training them. Another really great thing about having chickens is their waste, which we can take and add to our compost with other materials and then put in our garden, which we use then for nutrients for growing our vegetables, which is great. It would, in theory, be great for us, but really it's feeding our squirrels. So they're having a really awesome vegetable meal from our chicken fertilized vegetable garden.
Okay, great. So Angela, I'll go ahead and throw it to you and Sorrel.
All right. Well, we'll just dive right in. As Stuart mentioned earlier, this event tonight is all about asking and answering questions. So I'm going to kick things off with a handful of questions that hopefully will inspire members of the audience to start either raising their hand or typing in their own questions. So jump in and start writing those questions. In the meantime, let's start off, Sorrel, by maybe just, we're going to talk about Greywater first. So maybe can you tell us a little bit about how you got the idea to install a Greywater system, and how much, what did that take from the idea to getting it installed? Is there a lot of planning or research that you have to do?
Yeah, I am not from California. And I think when I moved here, I was really struck by the amount of drought there was. And so I think as soon as we really settled in, we started to gravitate toward resources that could help us with using less water at our house, but also thinking about, are there ways to reuse water? So, capturing rainwater, but for a variety of reasons, we thought that wasn't quite as appealing as Greywater, which just seemed to be something that would make so much sense for an area like Southern California. And we did do a lot of reading about different systems. There are a lot of books and websites, especially now that it's legal. For a long time, Greywater was illegal. Once it became legal, that helped with making those resources available. Some communities even subsidize Greywater systems, so the city will give you a rebate for installing them. And I think, a laundry to landscape system like we have is pretty straightforward to install. So they tell me. I'm not a handy person at all. And so we actually worked with Lee Gerard, who's here on the with us this evening, and he came up with the design, and we hosted a do-it-yourself event at our house where people signed up through Sustainable Claremont, and they came and learned how to do it and sort of watched the whole process from beginning to end under Lee's guidance.
Great.
I think you could if you were handy, you could do it yourself. I'm not handy, so this worked better, and it also helped us to share that information with other people in the community.
Right. So presumably with a more complex system, you might need a little more help or a little more planning.
Yeah, I think you would not only need that, I think you would probably have to have a professional install it, because you need a permit.
Yeah.
Is that right, Lee? You would need a professional to do a non-laundry to landscape system?
Yeah, we don't always pull permits, but you're supposed to pull a permit for anything that you cut into the house plumbing for, such as a bathtub or shower.
Right.
The laundry is great because you can get the Greywater as it comes off the back of the machine, so you don't need to alter any of the house plumbing. And by California code, you do not need permits for laundry-only systems like Sorrel has.
Right. So maybe we'll just back up for 1 second, and I'll ask, what's the difference between Greywater and Blackwater? I've heard this term, and I know that, Blackwater is like a no-no and Greywater is okay.
Yeah. So
do you want to give us a definition, Lee?
Sure. Greywater, as the name suggests, is sort of gently used water from inside the house. It's not rainwater. It's water from bathtubs, showers, bathroom sinks, and laundry. And anything else is considered black water. So toilets, obviously, and also kitchen sinks and dishwashers are considered black water due to fat soils and grease.
I see. Okay, so laundry to landscape system is a little more straightforward. No permit. You've got a pump in your washing machine that's going to push the water out. One of the questions I thought of right away was, if you have a low water use front loading washer, is it enough water to, really deliver enough to your plants?
Some of the
we were concerned
modern...
about that at first.
Okay. Oh, go on.
Go ahead.
We were concerned
Chris.
about that at first because it is not that much water, but as I talked about in the video, there's like 10 mulch basins that go out at, a good 30, 40 feet from the point at which the plumbing exits the house. And that's another probably 15 feet from the source. So it gets out there pretty well. It goes downhill, so that helps. And as Lee will tell you, you can also do it without the pressurized system. You can actually, if you have enough slope, you can just put it into a standpipe and it'll go out into the drip system as well.
Right.
Yeah, but even a modern, a lot of front loading washing machines still use about 20 gallons per load.
Wow.
The top loaders are a lot more. They're like up to 50 gallons a load, the old ones. Some of the super modern ones like Bosch and ASCO, these kind of European smaller washers, maybe are more like 12 gallons a load, but it's still water. It's fairly easy to install the system. It's just better to put it into the landscape than into the sewer system, where it's just, the sewer is going to be more waste, more energy consumed, more treatment. And in LA, at least, all wastewater from the sewer ends up in the ocean, which is just, this is total waste. It's better to put it back into the land.
Right. So here's a question for either Chris or Sorrel. What was the status of your yard? So in the video, you mentioned that you kind of transformed from grass to this beautiful, lush mix of native and drought tolerant plants. But so what was this, with the state of that? It sounds like you have to do a fair amount of digging, so I'm trying to get a sense for how disruptive. If I have a pretty well established landscape, am I going to do a lot of destruction to put in a system like this?
Oh,
Didn't seem like it was
Chris.
terrible. I mean, it was, in our experience, because we didn't have a lot of lawn left to deal with, it wasn't like we were cutting through that. You were just sort of digging through parts of the yard. I guess we had to go under a couple walkways and things like that. So, I mean, it is disruptive, but it's not like you're, digging a pool or something like that.
Right. About how deep would you say the digging involves?
So the mulch basins are usually about a foot wide and 3 feet long and a foot deep. And that's just fills with wood chip mulch, and that's where the gray water goes. The wood chips are part of the system. They're sort of a living filter that breaks down impurities and allows the gray water to percolate out laterally through sort of capillary action.
Right. We've got some questions coming in. I'm going to ask a few more and then we'll jump to the audience here. Are there specific types of plants that don't mix well? Sorrel, do you know if you had any plants that didn't like your gray water? Or in general, are there rules about what kind of plants will accept or thrive with gray water?
I'm sure Lee knows them off the top of his head. I remember looking that information up when we decided to do this, but really we just selected fruit trees. And I think most fruit trees are fine with gray water. So we didn't try to irrigate previously planted established plants. We sort of figured out where this could go and then put the new fruit trees where the outputs would be.
I see.
I think some can tolerate it better than others, but I don't think it's hard to find ones that are compatible.
Right. Lee, anything to add to that?
Fruit trees are great. Almost all fruit trees are going to thrive with gray water. The one thing to avoid is potentially California drought tolerant natives, because gray water is year round. It will irrigate throughout the summer. When something like a live oak tree or something really, you'll see those growing out in a field in the middle of nowhere with no irrigation. They don't want or need irrigation in the summer. They're used to the California climate. So it is possible to over irrigate, to overwater some plants that are, it's like drought tolerant natives.
Right. Okay, so I see a couple of questions here from the audience about different types of soaps. Detergent obviously is going to be in that water if it's coming from your washing machine. So tell us a little bit about the detergents that are allowed, and then what happens if you need to use bleach. What does that do?
Yeah. So first of all gray water systems have a means to turn them off. So if you are doing a load of laundry with bleach, you can send that load back to the sewer. And how that works is with a 3-port valve with one inlet, which is coming from the washing machine, and 2 outlets that are going one side to the sewer and one side to the garden. And there's this handle that you can turn, this one's tight, to determine where the water goes, either one way or the other. So this is usually mounted on the wall behind the washing machine. So if you are using something that you don't want going into your yard, you can always turn the handle, such as bleach. Regarding detergents, most liquids are fine. The one thing you have to really sort of pay attention to is salt buildup in the soil. Most, there's stuff in gray water. There's, in addition to detergents, there's laundry lins and stuff like that. Most of that stuff is fine. Some of the powder detergents have a lot of salts in them. So something like Tide powder is not going to be great. It's not going to kill everything immediately, but after 10 years of using Tide, the soil is going to you'll get salt buildup in the soil, so it won't be the greatest environment for a lot of plants. The liquids are great. We have a whole list. You can find it either on our website, or Greywater Action is a really good resource, and there's books about it too. But basically, Ecos brand, Trader Joe's liquid, Method, Free and Clear, Vasca. There's a bunch of them actually.
Great.
We just use the Trader Joe's stuff that Lee mentioned. But I've recently seen new laundry strips, and I don't know, Lee, how have you found those to be? They look appealing to me. For those of you who haven't seen them, they're just little strips.
Plastic free, yeah.
Yeah, right. And without having to transport all the liquid that goes with. So
yeah, I get a lot of ads for those on Instagram, but I haven't looked at the ingredients yet, and I don't honestly know. I mean, you can often just find online the ingredients of these things, and so we're basically looking for sodium and sodium compounds. So if everything is like sodium chloride, which is in a lot of things, salt, I would probably be a little cautious about using it.
So you really do need to read the ingredients if they put it on their labels. Okay, good advice. Stuart, do you have another question from the audience you want to read for us? You need to, there you go.
Let me remember to unmute myself. Yeah, so we have several questions about the laundry detergent. I think we got that one sorted out. Could you talk, maybe Lee and Cyril, a little bit about gray water systems that go beyond just the washing machine? So for those who want to take that next step to, you talk about black water, but like, is it possible to use your sink, bathtubs, like other, things in the household for these types of systems? And on the other end, for the use of the water, we had a question about, are there other uses for that other than just landscaping or irrigation? Could you use it for pools or fountains or things like that? Or any more information there would be helpful.
Okay, yeah, bathtubs and showers are the primary source of water, gray water in a home. It's, it can be just most of the water. A shower's often 25 gallons and a bathtub might be more like 50. So if people are showering a lot, and often it's every day, it's a lot of water, and it's relatively clean. You really hardly need to pay attention to shampoos and conditioners at all because the quantities are so low and the volumes of water are so high. The challenge with a laundry, even with a bathtub or shower, is that you have to cut into the plumbing of the house. Our favorite kind of house to do this is you sort of separate the gray water drain lines from the sewer system and redirect them out to the land. Ideally, our favorite situation is a single-story home with a crawl space, and all the plumbing will be accessible from the crawl space. Second-story bathrooms can be a little bit of a challenge, and a home with a slab on grade where there's a concrete slab and all the plumbing is under the concrete can be impossible. But yeah, once you get the water out, there is no laundry pump. So you have to so the challenge is to distribute it in the landscape, either by gravity or with like a sump pump type system. But even doing that, gravity flow systems, the water comes out and you split the flow into 2 and you split those into 4 and you can spread the water out like that. Pump systems are much like the one that Sorrel has. It's just a sump basin with a pump in it, and that's what shoots the water out. And then you can, if you have a pump, you can spread the water out really well, and you can go uphill and downhill and all around.
Chris, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, you can really go super simple and literally put a bucket underneath your bathroom sink and take it out every day. You can do what we've done. We can, next level is what Lee just described with showers and so on. We do know a guy down in Pomona who's got a whole house system where everything goes into a gigantic osmotic filter under the house. And then that goes down. So all the water in his house goes to the drip system. But that's pretty serious stuff. And I think his business is to do that kind of thing as well. So it's possible to go like everything. There may be implications of that for the downstream usage of actually flushing. The sewers do need to have some water in it to flush things down the line, but there's a whole range of things you do. It just really depends on how much money you want to spend and how much ambition you have.
Great.
We really wanted to do a bathroom one. We asked Lee, he looked at it maybe twice. We're like, please, are you sure it couldn't be compatible? And it just didn't work in our house. So
yeah, that's a huge source of water. Here's a question from the audience. Sorry, I don't have a name. I'll just read it here. Is there a problem if I do a do-it-yourself gray water laundry system and some gray water does not get captured in percolation and a bit runs into the street?
Well,
so Lee, go ahead.
That would be a code violation. Technically, you're not allowed to have runoff of gray water into the street. But it's not that hard to catch all the water. I mean, you just have to dig deep mulch basins and fill them full of wood chips, and the wood chips will soak up the water. There's plenty of resources online. Greywater Action, again, is a really good source of online information about how to do all this stuff. But it's, it shouldn't run off into the street is the short answer.
Great. And in fact, I know we have here, I'll put it in the chat for everyone. Greywater Action posted a few years back a YouTube video, a Greywater 101. We've actually hosted them, Sustainable Claremont has hosted them for a dialogue some years back, and they shared this with us. We didn't have the dialogue, but I think this is a good overview of a lot of the basics about gray water systems. I do recall the mentioning that gray water really does have to stay on your property. So, okay, Stuart, how about you? Do you have another question you want to read from the audience?
Yeah, so I think this is one that everyone has where, and Chris, you kind of spoke to this, you could go like super simple to super intricate, but can you give us like some sense of like, if I wanted to install a very basic system just for my laundry, it has like a ideal kind of situation, what kind of costs are we talking about to get something like this going? What's like a minimum type of system that one can invest in? I know that's a hard question.
Oh yeah, no, I can answer that. if you were to hire my company, Greywater Core, to install a system in Claremont, it's probably around $2,000 for a laundry landscape. Maybe more if there's some challenge, but probably not much less. We're based out of sort of near Eagle Rock, downtown LA, so it's a little bit of a drive for us. But you know, we'll send a crew out of 4 people. We'll do it in one day, and at the end of the day, you can do your laundry and it'll go water your plants.
Great. And then how about the DIY version? Do you guys, Chris, do you have any idea? Like, no, it's been too long.
I feel
Yeah.
like it was a couple $100 worth of materials.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then the time that you spend to do it.
The labor, right. You're paying yourself. Right. Okay.
Can I ask one more follow-up,
Sure.
Angela? Just sort of like another system question. So if you have, I mean, sorrel has like this amazing drought tolerant yard and a lot of native plants. If you don't have fruit trees or a drought tolerant yard, is this still like a good thing to have in terms of like refilling the water table, or just like a better way for water to be managed than sending it down the sewer? Or what other sort of positive environmental impacts are there beyond just watering trees or landscaping?
It's almost always better to put your waste, you know, your gently used wastewater into the land than into the sewer system, which uses a lot of chemicals and uses a lot of electricity and power and ends up dumping, in Los Angeles's case, secondary treated wastewater into the ocean. So, but I would suggest you might as well just throw a few fruit trees in the ground. Greywater is great for citruses, stone fruits, you know, apples, avocados, all that stuff is going to thrive with Greywater. So you might as well just throw one in the ground.
Yeah. Sorrel or Chris, do you have any other, you know, feelings about the benefits of your Greywater system that you want to share?
I think it's just been so easy. I mean, once it's installed, the upkeep, and it's just not a headache at all. I can't think of any reason not to do it. Honestly, it makes so much sense to reuse water. And unlike, as I mentioned earlier, some of the other things we've done with water, which are kind of unsightly or kind of weird with the rainwater harvesting, and, you know, Greywater makes a lot of sense. Greywater, you can't see it. It helps the fruit trees. It reuses water. It's been great.
Yeah.
The maintenance for the low-tech Greywater systems is super simple. It's just, what happens is the wood chips will decompose over time. They'll turn into a really rich compost that the trees are going to love, but they don't soak up those water as well. So really the maintenance is just adding wood chips to the mulch basins. And we do it like once a year.
Great. Okay. Okay. Here's a question. Actually, it's about for somebody who rents. Stuart, did you want to ask this question?
Yeah. So for somebody who rents and can't do like major infrastructure changes to their home, is this something that could be done? Is it like so non-invasive that it could be done for the average renter, depending on the situation, without, you know, too much of a fuss? Or like, is it, again, I understand it's like a case-by-case basis, but do you do this for renters, Lee, or Sorrel? Do you think that this is something that like a renter can get away with? Will my landlord know if I do this?
Usually we don't. We've done a few though, and the challenge is you have to run a pipe from the washing machine to the outside world. So in Sorrel's case, we had to drill through the crawl space and then pop out the crawl space somewhere else. If it's against an exterior wall, you can sometimes, you know, run the washing machine hose out the window. I mean, often renters don't want to invest, you know, a huge amount of money in the landlord's property and knowing they may leave sometime. So it's, you know, the economics of it are a little more challenging, but there are low-tech systems where you're maybe not doing a full, you know, there's low-tech systems, there's sort of homemade systems. You could do something like a laundry drum with a surge tank where you know, basically a garbage can outside the window. And if you can stick your laundry hose out the window, fill the garbage can, and then have a hose that drains out to the land, that's a really simple low-tech gray water system that a tenant could install, pretty easily. You could even, there's ways to, screw the window in such a way that it doesn't, it still is not accessible, to break-ins, but it still, allows you to get a hose outside. That's one of the challenges.
That's great. And then just a follow-up to that, maybe you've touched on this already, but we talked about watering fruit trees with gray water. Is there any reason you wouldn't want to water like raised beds with gray water, or like there's certain types of things that you don't want to use that water for in your yard?
Yeah, raised beds can be a challenge for a few reasons. For one thing, on a gravity flow or a low pressure pump system, it's a little harder to get the water back up into the raised bed. In terms of the edible food that you might be irrigating, the code, and I guess also the common sense requirement, is the part that you're eating should not be in contact with gray water. So root crops like onions or potatoes or something, you shouldn't irrigate with gray water. The other challenge is with the mulch basin systems like Sorrel has, there are deep trenches full of wood chips and there's underground pipes. So it can be just difficult to turn the garden every year and sort of tear things up. And it takes a while for the root systems of smaller, plants, lettuces or tomatoes to find the gray water, which is, usually a few inches underground.
Oh, good point. All right. Let's see. Stuart, have you scrolled through the chat? Have we gotten everybody?
The only question I think that we didn't get to from the chat was whether gray water systems increase electricity costs. So if there's
no, well, the low-tech systems that Sorrel has, or a gravity flow system, not at all. Sometimes we do pump systems, but here's my thought on that. And I actually have a picture of this system is the Kristen Wind Gap pumping system that's part of the California aqueduct. That water infrastructure of the state of California consumes 19% of all of electricity used in the state. Currently, Southern California's water comes from the Bay Delta, the Sierra Nevada mountains, the Colorado River, pumped hundreds of miles across deserts and over mountain ranges to get to Los Angeles. So in that context of getting our water here, it is great to be able to pump your water 20 feet into your backyard. And you'll see a very minor increase in the pumps don't run continually. They turn on for a little bit and then shut off. So it's a pretty minor water consumption, but in the context of the whole infrastructure of California's water, it's a great improvement.
Yeah, well, very good point. Those it's more expensive environmentally, not only just out of your wallet to take water out of the tap, out of the metered system. So I have one more question here, and that is, do you have to, Sorrel and Chris, this is for you, do you have a situation in your yard ever where you have to supplement your landscape watering with metered water? Or conversely, if it's too much water, do you have to turn it off because your trees are getting, waterlogged? Or it's probably rarely the case, but
it's never been too much.
Yeah.
And I don't think it would ever be enough for everything. I mean, you're always going to have to irrigate something, even when you have a pretty good palette of drought tolerant and native plants. I mean, Sorrel can talk more about this. So, but it does diminish water use. And the main point, I think, is, again, if you're even with a front loading washer, using 25 gallons a few times a week, that's 25 gallons that you don't need to use out of the tap. Right. So maybe you can talk about the plants and stuff like that.
We originally set up a drip system around the young fruit trees because we knew it would take a while for their roots to find the gray water source. And we've just continued to use that. And maybe we would use it more frequently each week were it not for the gray water, but we still do run it. It's on a system that also irrigates other plants that aren't fruit trees that also need probably to be watered. So it works out pretty well to just supplement a bit.
Right. Great. Go ahead. Did you want to add something?
Well, just I really hope that we that as a local community or even statewide start thinking about ways to subsidize or give rebates to people for installing gray water. I just think that I caught some of the interview with the outgoing president of the Metropolitan Water District. And I don't know if any of you heard that. And he was saying that, water, we should not be using water just once. And I think that if we start moving in that direction, it would make a lot of sense, given that we're not in a drought now, we're in a permanent, state of water scarcity, and it just makes the most sense. So I hope that's something that we can see come soon.
Yeah, especially given our drought.
You could look at what Pasadena is doing. They have a really great program with rebates and subsidies, and they're subsidizing people installing their own systems. And they even have a program where they're providing free installed laundry landscape systems for some residents. And they got a grant to do it, so it's all basically free.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, we should look at that.
Yeah, definitely. Stuart, do you have a question to share?
Yeah, I'll share. We've got two. I'll try to combine them into one from the audience. And I think these are the last two from the audience. I hope we've gotten to everybody. One is just for the use of the gray water. Is it enough for like a system like yours, Sorrel, to water like a lawn? Or like maybe you could just give like some more information about like how much water we're talking and what it could be used to water. So if it was like a small pad of grass or whatever. And then also about integrating a cistern into the property, if that's something that you thought about or something that pairs well with this type of system.
I think a cistern you can't store gray water. It would become black water. So that isn't something that we considered. In terms of grass, I think that it works better because the irrigation tubing can get clogged. It works better to have wider ones. And if you were doing grass, you can't spray it into the air, as Lee was saying earlier. You don't spray gray water, and you wouldn't want to, send it through tiny irrigation that would be required for grass. So my thinking is that wouldn't be a good fit for grass.
No, Lee, do you want to add to that? You're shaking your head.
No, she's totally right. Everything she said is spot on. Grass can be really difficult. You can't spray gray water, and it's really challenging to use it in drip lines. So, the really low-tech method would be to stick your washing machine hose out the window and try to splash water on your lawn, or do it with buckets by hand. Or else you could go super high-tech and find some kind of proprietary sterilizing thing with storage and UV lights and filters. And that is almost guaranteed to fail. So some of the really expensive high-tech gray water systems that we have installed, despite their high costs and challenges with permitting and the difficulties of installation, the companies that made them go out of business or they fail. So we just have kept it really low-tech, and it's served us really well.
Great.
I've known several people who've done what Lee has described by sticking the hose out the window and spraying it on their lawn. And yeah, it just doesn't work that well. You lose the filtering capacity of the mulch basins. And so you get this kind of gray coating on your lawn. And I don't know if then you have to hose it off, I guess, if you want to sit on it. So I don't know. It just doesn't sound like it's a very good idea. You're probably better off going with other kinds of a different kind of plant palette than a lawn with your drip system.
Right. The mulch is a key component, sounds like, for using and filtering gray water. I have one last question, and then I think we'll switch. We're about halfway or almost through our time, and we'll switch over to chickens. But my last question is more kind of for the future. this would probably be for you, Lee, or maybe either of you, Chris and Sorrel, if you've done research or heard about this and, you know, seen it in your news feed. Is there any movement with new building codes to write in code that will, you know, ensure that the gray, you know, that we can shunt our gray water outdoors, or better yet, use it to flush toilets or some other use like that?
Okay, so there's been a great progress in California plumbing code over the years. Plumbing codes are usually done by state. The CPC, the California Plumbing Code, about 12 years ago, gray water was illegal. It was all but illegal to do. And then every 3 years they revise it, and every 3 years it generally gets easier to do it. So, so now it is enshrined in the California Building Code that gray water systems are legal. So that's great. They refine it every once in a while. There's also a chapter on rainwater, which is now legal too, which I think that's been legal too. But then there's cities have their overlay codes, and there has been some progress. Like the city of LA now requires new buildings to be dual plumbed in preparation for gray water. So if you're building a house in LA now, you can't just have one sewer pipe coming out of the house and going with all the fixtures connected to it. You have to build it with 2 drain lines, gray water and black water. You have 2, so then you'd have 2 pipes exiting the house. Most contractors just tie them together at that point, but it does make the house gray water ready for the future. So they're not mandating that anyone installs a gray water system, but you have to, you know, prepare for the eventuality that someone will do it and make it easy to do so. So that's great. And that's actually helped us a few times where we've gone to a house that someone bought from a developer and they want gray water, and the house has been dual plumbed for us. So that saves a lot of money.
Right. And that's in the city of LA. Is that right?
City of LA.
Or,
yeah. I don't think any other city that I know of is doing that.
Right. Well, that's some progress. All right. So
just real quick, someone mentioned gray water use for indoor using it. Those systems, in order to use gray water to flush toilets or do laundry or something, those systems are really challenging, and I guess I wouldn't recommend it. It's really hard. Gray water is very rich in nutrients. It's very reactive. It tends to get anaerobic bacteria growth. In other words, it will turn septic if you try to store it. So it's just really challenging to use for indoor use.
Back to that mulch.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So is that a good, did you see any last minute questions, Stuart, or shall we kind of switch gears? All right. So thanks everyone for your questions, and thank you, Lee, for such great detailed and definitive answers. Okay, so now we'll make a switch to chickens. I know that maybe there were some, I'm going to rely on Stuart to go back. There were some chicken questions maybe filtered in, or maybe there's a relationship in some cases between chickens and gray water. I don't know. But I'll just dive in first to get things started, and we'll give Stuart a minute to gather any questions from the audience. Sorrel and Chris, I assume you did quite a bit of research before you just went out and bought chickens, or maybe not. Is it like pretty straightforward? Or do you have any, do you remember what that process was, that first step?
I think the first step was we thought it sounded fun, and then learned all the other stuff later. I mean, I think some research went into it, but like anything of that sort, it's sort of trial and error without the lore of being in a farming family or something like that. You have to learn all of this stuff that I guess is really out there. But yeah, Sorrel can talk a lot more about chickens than me.
Okay.
I mean, I think we weren't that creative, honestly. There, backyard urban chickens became pretty trendy like 10, 15 years ago. We just were riding that wave. It sounded really interesting and fun to do with little kids. We had a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and we thought raising chicks would be special for them. And we so we thought it would be interesting, but also helpful, you know, as the video said, like they could eat our scraps, we could use their waste for fertilizer. It just seemed like another way to sort of reduce our contributions to environmental challenges and also do something kind of fun.
Right. So did you start with just one or how?
No, and I think,
Okay.
you know, people recommend that you have at least 3. Just chickens are not solitary animals, so it's maybe not even kind to just have one. Yeah.
Right.
Although it is really hard to introduce new chickens into your into the set, but you have to if they go down to just 1 or 2 hens, you know, introducing some more is pretty necessary. Although you have to trick them sometimes. For instance, like I've had it recommended to introduce the new chickens at night, because the pre-existing chickens won't really remember that was a new addition. I mean, chickens are fun and they're cute, but they're not that smart. So you can really trick them easily.
Right. How about you, Laura? Did you just dive right in, and what was your process like?
Our reasons for getting chickens were a lot like Sorrel and Chris's. We had young children. We live in a house here in Claremont that has a big lot and plenty of space. And we also, in addition to, you know, wanting the benefits of them eating our food scraps and also getting their eggs and having the benefits of their waste becoming compost, we also just wanted to have a little bit more, wanted to be closer to our food and really wanted to have a little more influence over the nutritional value of what we were eating. And you really do get that when you're raising hens that are producing eggs. You have a lot of control over their diet and you get really nutritionally dense eggs, and they're fresh and they taste better. And so we liked that as well.
Great.
The amount of research, I would say, is probably different for everybody. My husband took a bit of convincing. And, you know, you do have to do a fair amount of planning, I think, to do it right. You can certainly sort of scrap together a coop. But, you know, on the theme of sustainability, we had an old shed that we wanted to repurpose. And so it was really fun to think about reimagining how to use that shed. So that was part of the adventure for us.
Great. And I believe Sorrel and Chris, you guys repurposed a pet's home for your first chickens, maybe a dog run or something. Is that right?
I mean, we've done it several times with different upgrades, often with repurposed stuff. The current shed, I actually had a friend who took down an old fence and it had a lot of wood, and I just went up there and took it and, you know, cut off the bad parts and used it to construct this one. You still have to buy a few new parts, obviously, but there are a lot of ways of designing and building coops, and the internet is full of them. If you go to, what's the one that people use that has just people's, you know, different ideas, kind of a crafty. Anyways, there's plenty of
Pinterest or something.
yeah, things like that.
Yeah. So here's a related question. Where did you buy your chickens? Locally? Did you, I'm assuming you bought them locally.
We've gotten our chickens a variety of different places. We got some chicks from Amy's farm. We've also gotten them from, I have a coworker who has chickens out in Ukaipa. She had some extras, and they also sell them at Pomona Feed and Fuel, right in Pomona. They sell chicks. And then we've even bought some at Mouse Egg Farm, or egg, you could go buy eggs there. And then they also sell pullets, which are, you know, maybe like 4 or 5 month old chickens, which are a lot easier to raise than the tiny chicks, which often need to, you know, they require heat, and you have to really be available to care for them and make sure they're doing fine. So, you know, depending on what age chicks you want, you can go to different places, and you can also buy them in the mail. There are mail order chickens, chicks. They come in boxes. I've never actually done that though.
I'll just chime in and share that, you know, our first round of chickens, I really went I did a deep dive on all the different breeds and what color eggs they lay and how frequently they lay eggs. Each breed is really different, and they actually all have different sort of personality traits. And so, you know, my first batch, I was really excited about the color of the eggs. Second batch, I was more interested in the economy of the eggs. There are some breeds that lay a lot more eggs and eat a lot less food, or there's some breeds that are really good foragers. And so I've made those decisions based on sort of where my flock is and what I think we need to add to it. But the funnest thing we ever did was we ordered eggs from a breeder somewhere in, gosh, I think it was Minnesota. They're heirloom chicken breeds, and they sent us a bunch of fertile eggs, and we hatched some ourselves, and that was really fun and quite challenging too.
Right. So how
And we
long are
also
you
got some-
incubating them? If you get them in the mail, how long are you incubating them before they hatch?
It's 21 days.
Oh, wow. Okay. Go ahead,
One
Sorrel.
time we actually had you know, you can't tell what they are when they're small. And one time, you know, sometimes mistakes happen, and we actually ended up with a rooster. And then consequently, we ended up with a hen that laid an egg that she did hatch. And so we actually had that full process happen. So I guess that was the one learning experience the kids had.
Great.
Yeah, that was fun. I was going to say, we got chicks that our kids' classroom had incubated. So they went through that whole process and then needed people to take them. And then I think also we end up inheriting a lot of chickens from people who give it a try and then decide it's not for them. Or, you know, students maybe who leave and they're like, will you take our chickens? So yeah, we've gotten them so many different ways.
Right. Okay. So here's another question, kind of going back to the coops that we were talking about a minute ago. Is there a minimum size? You know, do they need to free range? Or are they happy to be in pretty, you know, tight quarters?
I think they really want as much space as they can have. They're pretty adaptable, so you can put them in a pretty small space. I feel bad for chickens that get kept in rabbit hutches. I think that's too small. And I know there's guidelines, maybe 10 square feet per hen or something is a recommendation.
I think it's much less than that, actually,
Oh,
which
really?
is sort of sad. Yeah. They, you know, technically they don't really require a lot of space, but they sure do need it. And when you have an abundance of space for them, they tend to do better. When there's not much space, you tend to get issues where they may pick on each other. And so you know, they don't require a lot, but they sure do appreciate it.
Right. We'll circle back to some behavior questions later. I know that you guys have some stories to tell, but let's stick with this more basic question. What do you feed them, and do they need a special diet to produce eggs consistently or to produce good eggs? Laura, do you want to start, and then we'll go to Sorrel and Chris.
Sure. So laying hens do require a special diet. I learned with my first batch of chickens, you know, we were feeding them corn as treat on the regular, and we ended up losing a chicken from a fatty liver, which tends to present when it's really, really hot, and it does get really hot here in Claremont. And so we learned from that experience that we needed to change their diet a little bit and maybe provide less of those kind of rich treats. And so I forget exactly what the ratio is, but a typical layer feed includes the right mix of calcium and protein and all the other sort of essential things that they need to be able to produce well. And then our chickens love greens. And so we struggle to keep them out of the garden. And so they get all our leftover greens. They get, you know, when we trim the grapevines, they get those, and they love those grape leaves from the grapevines. So whatever we can. The only thing they really can't eat is avocado. They're one of the birds that just can't handle avocado, and you'll get the same issue with a fatty liver. But they're not picky.
Okay, Sorrel, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, the chicks have special feed that's specially formulated for them. And then when they're laying hens, like Laura said, they have feed that just meets those nutritional needs. But like Laura, we give them all our scraps. And then I think it's also recommended that you give them oyster shell or even their own shells back, you know, just to make sure that they get enough of the calcium.
Right. Great. Let's see here. Stuart, is this a good time for an audience?
Yeah, we've got a couple
question?
of questions. Yeah.
Okay.
So this one's pretty like quick and easy. So I'll do this one first. What kind of chickens do you guys have? Like, or I guess to add on to that with my own question, is there one that you prefer at this point, having had chickens for a couple years?
I'll tell you that I don't like the ones that I have right now very well. Like I said in the video, they're just really skittish. They're not very fun. They're not that fun to look at. I mean, they're my least favorite of all the chickens we've had. We've had buff Orpingtons and black Australorps, you know, just mellower ones. I think also the little bantam ones that are small are kind of fun. But I think that I'd like to do what Laura did and order some eggs to hatch.
I have to say, you know, chickens can certainly be pets. We might have one that sort of is at pet level in our home. She's from the original crew, and she just got really bonded to our son. But mostly they're not pets. They're you know, somewhere between pets and farm animal, I think, when you're raising backyard chickens. And their breeds do have different personalities. We have a Plymouth Barred Rock who's just as friendly and sweet as they come. And the Leghorns, Sorrel, I think you might have a Leghorn. They're flighty and they don't really like to engage with you, but they're the best foragers. And in terms of like the economy of eggs, they don't require a lot of food. They like to forage, and they are just like, you know, gangbusters when it comes to producing eggs. And so when I'm thinking about, you know, managing our flock, I always like to have a Leghorn because I like the eggs, but I always like to have kind of a big personality too, and maybe one that's really pretty. And of course we can't have more than 3, otherwise there's lots of other choices.
Right.
Laura, do yours free range during the day?
They do. So that big aluminum tool shed got turned into their coop, which is where they sleep at night. And then we have a pretty sizable run that is protected from predators that they can access during the day. And then beyond that, we do have sort of on their side of the yard, it's enclosed, and we let them free range throughout the day. And I will tell you, we used to have tons and tons of weeds on that side of the yard, and not a one to be found anymore. So they're great at, you know, keeping the bugs down and keeping the weeds away. And the really fun part is they're awesome at turning the compost. So that's another way you can use them in your yard that's, you know, really sustainability focused. You can sort of build your composting system into your chicken system, which is something we're still trying to dial in, but man, they love to attack the compost.
So you can just drop your scraps on their side of the yard and they turn it over and add their bit to it, and that's great. Yeah. Okay.
Can I throw another one out there, Angela?
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of questions about sort of like chicken life cycle questions. But I'll start with one, since it's so like scorching hot this week. What do you do when it gets this hot to protect the health of your chickens? Is there something that you can do? Are they pretty hardy and they could just stay outside, or what?
They are really hardy. They're surprisingly hardy. That being said, I learned the hard way that they will stop drinking water when it's 10 degrees above their own body temperature. And we did lose a chicken to heat a couple of years ago. So I think some of the ways that people help them when it's really hot is to water down the coop so that the ground gets cool and they can dig. They love digging so they can get deep into the moist dirt. Also those misters that kind of just put a nice fine water spray can be useful. Sometimes people freeze treats like frozen watermelon And definitely just making sure that the water gets refreshed and stays cool. Maybe put an ice pack in there. Those are some of the ways that we do it, but really they are very hardy.
They keep themselves cool by having access to like a dust bath in the shade. And we give them access to plenty of water. Obviously, one of my favorite things to do, it's really fun to do with the kids, is to, to get like a plastic cottage cheese container or something and put maybe some spent berries that we're not going to eat, fill it with water and freeze it. And then it kind of becomes chicken enrichment for them on a really hot day. And they tend to not get those treats from us unless it's, 104 degrees or above. They can usually manage just fine on their own. Once it gets above 104, they start struggling. They do this really cute thing. They puff out their wings a little bit. We call it the chicken air conditioners. They're letting the cool air underneath their wings close to their body. That's their way of cooling off.
Right. But they don't like to get in water themselves. They don't like to get wet. Yeah. Okay. Stuart, another follow-up to that?
Yeah, and a couple more follow-ups. So just like any other animal, when they get sick, you have to take them to the vet, presumably. Are there like special chicken vets? Can you just take them to your general vet? And also, what do you do when they're done laying eggs and then when they just kick the bucket? Like, so those are kind of separate questions, but I'm trying to pair them all into one.
So there is a vet in Claremont that will treat chickens. Chaparral Pet Hospital has an excellent vet on staff there that deals in rare and exotic animals. She treats tortoises and birds. And so we have had to go there once or twice, and she's been great. In terms of what to do when you lose a chicken, I really can't recommend this enough. In fact, I'll put a link in here in just a moment. When you lose a chicken, it's really, because chickens are food animals, it's really important to take it as an opportunity to have a necropsy. And the name, it's called the California Animal Health and Food Safety Lab, and it's there's several in the state, and there's one really close in San Bernardino. It's run by the UC Davis Ag Extension, and you literally can take your chicken there and they will do a full necropsy and diagnose its death. And the first time we lost a chicken, we learned so much, and so much of it actually really set my mind at ease. They tested for everything. And we learned, that's how we learned it died of a fatty liver. And we learned how to correct that. But they tested for Salmonella, West Nile virus. They looked at the lungs and told us that, there was some pollutants in their lungs, and that probably has to do with the proximity of living close to the freeway. And they tested the blood. They looked at lead levels. And so we knew exactly what we're eating when we get those eggs, and we know that our flock at that time didn't have Salmonella. They weren't harboring West Nile virus or any of those other pathogens. And so I highly, highly recommend it, and it doesn't cost a thing. It's free.
Wow, that's great. And what about the Sorrel? Do you want to take the piece of that about what you do when your hens stop laying, but they're maybe still living for some time?
Yeah, it's just a little hen retirement home at our house. I know some people, cull the flock, but we don't. We just keep them.
And roughly how long of a life might you expect that to be if you let them go peacefully into the sunset?
We had one hen that lived till she was over 10, right, Chris? The one that was hatched at Sycamore School, she was over 10. Most of them don't, though. I feel like, we've had a couple of chickens that have gotten sick, and that's been concerning, but most of them that weren't a victim to a predator, just sort of keel over, after some number of years. And I guess I could do what Laura's recommending and find out why they keeled over. But it's, I just assumed that it was just a natural death.
So on average, would you say 5 years, less than 5 years? No idea.
5 to 7.
Okay.
Technically in the literature, they say when you're getting chickens, you should plan on 8 to 14. That in my experience has been on the long side. Right now our oldest girl is about 7. And so everyone else is sort of phased out early. I'd say around 5 years.
Yeah. And how many of those years are they laying?
They lay the whole time. It's just
Okay. They
the
slow
number,
down.
the frequency slows down.
Right. Okay.
They sort of start going into decline. Their egg production goes into decline after about year 2 or 3.
Okay. Okay. So, Stuart, do you have a question from the audience, or should I take one from our list?
Yeah, let me do one more question from the audience,
Okay.
just about coop management. So can you have different age hens in at the same time? So the question specifically was, can you have bantams in the same coop as full-size breeds? Or, are there things you need to worry about with the age of mixing different ages of the chickens or different types of chickens that we should be thinking about?
We had a bantam that was in with full-size chickens, and she was the bossiest bully of them all. So to me, it seemed more of a personality thing and a breed thing than a size issue. I mean, I think you wouldn't want to just incorporate small chicks with full-size hens. They would do damage quickly. And the thing about chickens is that once there's any kind of red from bleeding, like even if a hen just hurts itself in a small way and has a scratch, the other hens will find that red spot and keep on pecking and sort of torturing the hen. So I think that's what you need to watch for more than the age or the size, is just how they're responding to the newcomer.
Laura, anything to add? Or I have another follow-up to that question.
Sorrel got it.
Okay. Well, I think that's a good segue into the question about behavior problems between the ladies. So for a few of you who joined us before the meeting started, you might have heard us talking amongst each other, the hosts and co-hosts here, about what kinds of behavior issues do you deal with? So maybe just pick a recent behavior problem and tell us what the problem was and what, if anything, you found to remedy their behavior toward each other, the hen dynamics.
We haven't really had too many problems with the hen dynamics, and I think that's probably related to the amount of space they have, because they're not right on top of each other. They have plenty of space. They're free ranging, I'd say 4 or 5 days out of 7, and they have a lot of space in the coop and in the run. But it is interesting to see there's always a top chicken. I mean, that really is true. There's a pecking order. And I don't know quite how they work that out, but I always seem to know that who is the top chicken. And when one dies or, finds a new home, somebody is sort of queued up to move into the spot, and it doesn't really take them very long to work that new pecking order out. And so just giving them plenty of space has been okay for our flock. The introduction of new ones, some people say, like Sorrel said, you introduce them at night. That certainly works for some people. What we do is we close off the run from the coop and we let them live sort of parallel to each other for a couple days. And then, and then we let them out to free range, and there's usually enough space that they just kind of work it out. And we haven't really had any issues. It's been pretty easy.
Great. Sorrel, do you have any interesting stories to share.
Angela knows that I shared with her that our hens are, bullying each other actually currently. We're struggling with that. And I do think that it might be less of a problem if they had more space, but we really can't do anything about that right now because of what I mentioned before, which is that we have a lot of predators here. So I don't really want them to just free range. So I think it might be more about chicken entertainment strategies than anything else. But so anyway, so, one of them in particular is really a bully, and two of them have been ganging up on one, and they actually injured her to such an extent that I separated the injured one for a while and helped her be able to heal. And we bought these little devices called chicken peepers, which get inserted in their nostrils, and it makes it so the chickens can only see in front of them, that they can't see very well in front of them, so they can't really direct their pecking in an as injurious a way. And it also helps with, some chickens also have a habit of pecking and eating their own eggs. That's also a really hard habit to break, and these peepers are meant to help with that as well. So two of our hens are wearing these ridiculous little red spectacle things right now, and in order to protect the third one.
Great.
Oh, but that reminds me, with the egg pecking, I just want to mention that we have had that problem in the past. And like I said, it's really hard to get them to stop doing it. They like the taste of their own eggs. They'll also eat chicken. If you have leftovers from takeout, they will eat chicken. They have no problem with that. And so I had learned about a trick that actually works really well for us, which is to put golf balls in their nesting boxes. Because for the chickens, that helps them, first of all, locate where they should lay in case they're laying. Sometimes they lay in places you don't want them to, like somewhere in the yard. When ours used to free range, I found a nest that I didn't know existed, with 12 eggs in it. So it helps tell them where to lay. And it also helps discourage the pecking of the eggs, because they try that on the golf ball, and obviously nothing appealing happens to them, nothing appetizing. So it breaks them of that habit.
Interesting. Sorry, Lord, were you going to add something to that?
No.
Okay. So for beginners, Carrie asks, what kind of breed might you recommend? Is there a breed that you might recommend for someone who's just getting started?
I have to say, I just love those Plymouth Barred Rocks. They're just so sweet and good natured. They don't go broody. So, well, most of the time they don't go broody. Going broody is when they want to hatch a clutch of eggs, and they'll sort of sit on the nest and hoard eggs, hoping to be able to hatch. So when a chicken goes broody, they stop laying, and you don't want them to do that. It's sort of takes a toll on their health. And unless they're actually going to be allowed to hatch eggs, you really should discourage it. So the Barred Rock are just so sweet and friendly and mellow. They're not the kind of chicken who's going to hop over your fence and visit the neighbor. And we do have two of those right now.
Oops.
Actually, we have a neighbor who really enjoys it and doesn't mind the weed control. But yeah, and the other breed that's really sweet, especially if you have young children, is the Orpingtons, the buff Orpingtons, or any of the Orpingtons.
And I think, you can get really specific and special varieties, especially if you order online. But if you just go to a feed store like in Pomona or San Dimas, they will have chicks that are these really standard ones. So I think those are really the common ones, those Barred Rocks and the buff Orpingtons.
Great. Stuart, did I miss any questions? I feel like I did in the chat.
Let me go back through and make sure, maybe while I'm making sure we got through all those, I have a question I'd like to ask. I think I asked Lee the same question. For renters, are chickens something that you can have, if you don't own your place? Do they take too much a toll on a side yard or a side run, or is that possible? Is that something that you'd advise against, or what kind of space is required to humanely have a couple of chickens and without them destroying your yard too much.
As Sorrel shared earlier, they themselves are voracious gardeners, and so if you live in a place where there's a really beautiful landscape and your landlord expects you to maintain that landscape, I would say you're going to have to definitely have them sequestered. But they don't need much space. They're really lovely, and depending on the breed, they tend to not make a lot of noise, so they're not really disturbing your neighbors. And so it's my opinion, I think as a renter, you could definitely manage a small flock of chickens.
I definitely agree. I think you could, because you could build or purchase a coop that would be portable. So you could take it with you, if you left the house you were renting, and you could confine them and with temporary fences if there were certain kinds of landscaping you didn't want them to get into. But also I think they're the most destructive with new landscaping or like tender vegetables and things. So they won't hurt, established trees or bushes. And I think it would be great for renters to try.
Probably a good idea to let your landlord know so they're not surprised. But maybe that's up to you and your relationship with your landlord.
I do think, Laura, too, like they are quiet, but they're not as quiet as I thought. Or maybe some breeds are better than others. So that applies to both renters and anywhere you're living in an urban setting. And I think they make a sort of a sound in the morning. And also if they lay eggs, they celebrate. And then we currently have a hen who thinks she's a rooster. So she's been crowing. I'm afraid some of our neighbors might think we have a rooster. So there are a few like noise issues, I think, to deal with, but it's definitely not too much.
Right.
Something to consider in terms of where you would put the coop is what I'm getting at.
Right.
It's definitely not worse than a barking dog, I think.
No.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. Good point.
Yeah.
So that makes me think about the rules. So you guys both live in Claremont, and I think you mentioned earlier that you're allowed to have 3. But if you have a neighbor who's not as excited about the noises or the idea of a neighbor having chickens, you have the rules on your side. Is that right? The city will support you if you have a complaint, for example, from a neighbor.
You're permitted to have them, but I would assume that it would be treated just as any other sort of disturbance, a noise disturbance. So it could become problematic, I suppose.
Right.
There is a limit of 3, and I saw a question earlier about does lot size or length from away from the home matter? And my reading of the city code, which I pasted into the chat, is that as long as you have 3 or under, there's no requirement on the distance or length away from the home. Certainly, if there are noise issues, I'm sure the city would deal with that in whatever way they do.
Right. Okay, anyone else from the audience? I think we've covered all the questions that we had.
I don't see any others from the audience, Angela, but I just have another question really quick about Sorrel. You mentioned predators a couple times and keeping them protected from predators. What are the types of predators that you have to worry about with chickens? Is it like cats and coyotes, or like what are the things that if depending on the neighborhood that you're in, do you need to worry about or think about before you make the jump to get chickens?
I think everything wants to eat chickens, so you need to just be really careful. Hawks, we've had chickens attacked by hawks. We, as I mentioned in the video, coyotes, bobcats. I know people whose dogs have killed their chickens, or a neighbor's dog. So there's a lot to be wary of when it comes to chickens, keeping them safe. That being said, I mean, they can also, they fly, you know, up into the trees sometimes to protect themselves. And they, the hawk that landed on our hen wasn't able to take her away. So it's still worth doing, and it could even be possible to free range them. We just lost heart, I guess, after losing a few to predators and seeing them in our yard. We stopped being up for that, but I still think it would be worth a try, depending on where people live.
So Laura, yours free range. Do you lose them occasionally, or how do they stay safe?
So there's, if you're going to free range them, there's a couple things you should think about, which is the landscape and the space. They sort of look after each other really well. They tend to sound the alarm when there's a predator, and they're wired to find those predators. And so they'll alert each other. And, you know, if we have a hawk fly over or something like that, they'll go right back into the coop for, you know, protection. But they need to have hiding places. And so you should have mature shrubs that they can hide in, you know, or, you know, shade under. We have a raised veggie bed that it's actually has space underneath, and they like to hang out under there and dust bathe during the summer, but that's also where they go if they think there's a predator. And so there's some things like that that you can do. We did have, you know, we're pretty wide open with our coop during the day, and the only loss to a predator we have had was because I forgot to shut the coop at night. And I'm about 95% sure it was a raccoon. And the reason is I noticed we were missing one. I found some feathers, and so I started poking around, and we did eventually find, you know, the chicken body, and it was put under a pot. The plastic pot had been put over the dead chicken.
Wow.
Which you're only a raccoon can do.
He left you a present. Oh.
Yeah, there's also, you know, depending on the predator, they tend to dispatch with the chickens in certain ways. And so there are some telltale signs of, you know, who might have eaten your chicken based on what you find.
Okay. All right. Well, I will turn it over to Stuart now, and we'll wrap things up, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Angela, so much for driving that conversation, and Laura for joining us, and Lee, and of course, Chris and Sorrel for letting us enter your home, and for taking the time to make the video and to speak with everyone tonight. I feel like it was really helpful. You know, people have a lot of questions about these two topics, so I think having all this expert panel here is awesome. So just wanted to thank you all again so much for making this possible, and thank everyone who came out tonight. And we'll wrap it up. So you all have a great night. Angela, anything else you wanted to say?
No, I just hope that everyone considers coming next week. So we're going to feature another home, same time, same place, another Claremont home, and the focus next week is on home energy efficiency. So if you registered for this event, you're registered for next week too, and we hope to see you.
Thanks, everyone. You have a great night.
All right. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.